All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we are completely dismantling a myth that's probably been drilled into your head since kindergarten. You know the one, the assumption that a super high IQ automatically guarantees a massive net worth. We're taught that if you study hard, get straight A's, and earn all the right credentials, you're pretty much guaranteed to get rich. But the data? Well, the data tells a completely different, almost totally backward story. What we're looking at today is the intelligence-wealth paradox. We're going to break down the systemic forces, the cognitive blind spots, and the absolute psychological traps that keep some of the most brilliant minds on the planet completely stuck in the financial mud.
To really wrap our heads around this paradox, just picture this scenario for a second. You've got a highly credentialed neurosurgeon, right? Making over $400,000 a year, living in a gorgeous neighborhood, driving a luxury car, but they are quietly panicking every single time a totally unexpected expense pops up. On the flip side, you have an average IQ plumber making a fraction of that salary who just consistently saves, picks up a couple of rental properties, and retires a self-made millionaire without an ounce of financial stress. Now, if intelligence were the main driver of wealth, this just flat out wouldn't happen. And yet, longitudinal studies prove to us that this isn't a fluke, it's a highly predictable, recurring pattern.
Let's look at the reality on the ground. A staggering 67% of Americans are currently living paycheck to paycheck. And remarkably, that statistic includes a massive number of folks holding advanced degrees. We're talking doctors, lawyers, engineers. In fact, research actually shows that nearly a third of graduate degrees have a negative lifetime return on investment once you factor in opportunity cost. So clearly, raw intelligence and a fancy education do not serve as a magic bullet against financial fragility.
So how does this actually happen? Let's jump into section 1. Neuroscience and ego, and look at the diagnosis.
To really understand exactly why this happens, we literally have to look inside the brain itself. Because financial decision-making isn't just a math problem, it's a biological battle. Under financial stress, your brain's entire architecture just shifts. Look at the dominance on this chart. The emotional limbic system totally overrides your analytical neocortex nearly 80% of the time. When the stock market tanks or a huge surprise bill arrives, your amygdala triggers the exact same fight or flight response it would if you were suddenly being chased by a bear. And having a high IQ does not switch off this primal instinct. It basically just dresses your panic up in much more sophisticated, rational-sounding language.
Think about what our traditional schools reward: academic intelligence. They train you to find the perfect, crystal clear, certain answer inside a highly structured system. It entirely rewards memorization and compliance. But financial intelligence, it requires the exact opposite. You have to navigate deep ambiguity, manage your own emotions under massive uncertainty, and take calculated risks when you only have maybe a fraction of the information. So excelling in the classroom actually builds mental habits that can completely destroy you in the markets.
Which leads us to Section 2, Traps of the Brilliant Mind. Let's explore these specific cognitive pitfalls.
So how exactly do these brilliant minds fail? Well, hyperanalytical thinkers don't just make random mistakes. They fall into highly specific, devastating traps that average IQ individuals honestly just effortlessly avoid. The first major pitfall is the optimization fallacy, basically perfectionism paralysis. Smart folks will research endlessly. They'll spend 6 entire months building complex spreadsheets to compare 15 different investment platforms, waiting for 100% certainty before making a move. But decision theory research shows that these maximizers actually earn about 20% less over a decade than satisficers, the people who just make a good enough choice and move forward. While the genius is busy optimizing, the compounding clock is happily ticking away for somebody else.
Here's a wild fact. High IQ brains are literally addicted to complexity. Brain scans actually show that brilliant minds derive literal hits of dopamine from solving novel, difficult puzzles. A brilliant software engineer will happily burn 400 hours coding a highly complex algorithmic crypto trading bot just because it's intellectually stimulating. Meanwhile, they'll completely ignore the incredibly boring, dirt-simple index fund strategy that actually guarantees wealth simply because it provides zero intellectual satisfaction. And this complexity addiction directly fuels what we call the FOMO paralysis cycle. We see this perfectly in a case study of an economics professor. This guy knew every single bubble theory, he overanalyzed early crypto, flagged dozens of potential risks, and he hesitated. But as he sat there watching his average IQ colleagues make just extraordinary returns, the window closed and he experienced intense, crushing fear of missing out. The emotional pressure mounted until he completely threw his careful analysis out the window and bought impulsively right at the absolute peak of the market. His highly sophisticated brain basically built the psychological torture chamber where he fully understood the theory behind every mistake he was making, but completely lacked the emotional regulation to stop himself.
Let's move on to Section 3. High income is not wealth. Time to unpack the infamous paycheck trap.
So many high earners suffer from a structural illusion, constantly confusing a massive monthly salary with actual net worth. Being a high-income, low-net-worth individual is honestly one of the most dangerous positions you can be in modern professional life. A massive factor here is something called the Duesenberry ratchet effect. Smart people often work in really high-status environments, right? Think top-tier law firms, tech giants, massive hospitals. Because of upward social comparison, a junior lawyer making $250,000 feels genuinely poor compared to the senior partner pulling in over $1 million. To soothe that cognitive dissonance, they lever up massive debt to buy status symbols, the private schools, the luxury watches. They basically create a relentlessly expensive treadmill just to signal their competence to their peers.
This dynamic perfectly illustrates Robert Kiyosaki's foundational rule. The wealthy acquire assets that pay them while they sleep, while high-income earners acquire liabilities that just eat their cash. Look, an expensive luxury car lease and a $600,000 mortgage that eats up 40% of your take-home pay, those are not assets. They're obligations masquerading as success. If your lifestyle just expands to absorb every single raise you get, your massive income isn't actually building wealth. It's literally just building a fancier, faster treadmill.
Let's look at the actual math here with the wealth formula. It's essentially your capital multiplied by your return multiplied by time. And as you can see, time is doing all of the heavy lifting here. A disciplined, middle-income earner who controls their expenses and consistently invests the difference over a few decades will absolutely mathematically crush a high-spending executive every single time. Why? Because wealth isn't actually about how much you make, it's entirely about your savings rate and your time horizon.
Which brings us to a profoundly humbling realization from the data. As the saying goes, the enemy of great wealth is not low IQ. The enemy is high IQ combined with low wisdom. Intelligence actually becomes a barrier the second it causes overconfidence. Being super smart in the markets is kind of like driving a Ferrari. If you're driving on black ice, that powerful V8 engine is actually way more dangerous than a slow, beat-up sedan. You must have the wisdom to do the incredibly boring thing long enough for the exponential curve of compounding to step in and save you.
So, how do we fix this? Section 4. Breaking the poverty cycle. Let's look at the behavioral patches.
The good news here is that intelligence isn't a permanent life sentence to poverty. We can totally overwrite these buggy patterns. First up, stop waiting for 100% certainty. Implement what's called a first decile deadline. Basically, force yourself to make the call the exact moment you have 70% of the information. Second, you have to bypass that emotional limbic system entirely by fully automating your investments the second your paycheck hits, so your feelings never even get a vote. And third, you really must cultivate intellectual humility. Even if you are literally the smartest person in the room, admit that you still might need a basic, boring index fund or a solid financial advisor. The willingness to be a beginner, that is incredibly profitable.
You also need to actively fight the urge to show off by implementing a stealth wealth rule. Your goal should be to have 95% of your peers completely underestimate your true net worth. You have to separate your ego from your bank account. Stop buying depreciating assets to prove your intelligence to people who aren't even paying your bills. You have to break that devastating link between consumption and your own self-worth.
Ultimately, we have to make the transition from just being smart to actually being wealthy. A smart person relies on their raw brain power and exhausting constant willpower to actively solve complex problems and optimize every little detail. But a wealthy person does something entirely different. They build automated systems that just quietly work for them in the background. They accept uncertainty, they tune out the noise, and they focus 100% on long-term consistency.
The evidence we've covered in this explainer is absolutely crystal clear. Your raw intelligence might help you earn a massive paycheck, but your behavior entirely dictates whether you get to keep any of it. Average behavior executed perfectly is going to be brilliant behavior executed sporadically every single time. So the final question you really have to answer today is this. Are you going to keep waiting for your perfect intellect to somehow save you, or are you finally ready to build the emotional systems required to actually get wealthy?